Dingfelder, Goods, Maniscalco, Vieira, Miranda, Carlson, and Citro.
Here. All right, we are going to revisit item agenda number 9. And before we start this conversation, Rob, if you don't mind, Council, if you will indulge me on this, I feel it compelling that if there is any members of this board that are having sidebar communications with anybody who is presenting anything to this board, if they would be kind enough to come back to this board after the sidebar, reveal the sum and substance of that discussion, because there may be information within that discussion that may help me make my decision. Keeping any information solo to themselves, in my opinion, is not doing justice to this board. Rob, you're up.
As we return, we had Sal redrafting the agreement, and he has not come back yet, so I don't have anything new to say since a half hour ago.
We can all go take a nap now?
I'm sorry?
We can all go take a nap? Got a motion, seconded?
Take a nap.
Take a nap. It was made by Councilman Maniscalco.
Second.
All right, so we're waiting.
We're waiting for that agreement to come through, but in theory, did you have any other questions about?
Does any board members have any questions?
Okay, so I'll defer only till Sal gets here with an amended agreement, and at your pleasure.
How do you know how long of a wait it is going to be?
He's in the elevator.
Thank you. Perfect.
Yeah. Good question. Here he comes. The man of the day.
Now it's an alley-oop that your partner there didn't get. Which one? The north or the south elevator? Yes. But there used to be a
You want
woman
to
who was.
distribute, or do you want to just explain?
Yes, man, she would know when to start and stop that.
Salter Legal Department. What I did is there's a new resolution that includes both the city, all three, the city, the CRA, and the group with whom we're doing the contract. I made that change on both the resolution and on the agreement. And Mr. Dingfeld, I did make one of the changes that you recommended. I think it was you, that they're only going to be able to allow to assign this to one other person. They have one other entity that they may want to assign the agreement to, but it's one and only one. So we made that change in there as well. So those were the changes that were made. The major one was basically adding the city to the agreement. If you're disposed to approve this today, it will come back to you as the city council on the 19th, and I ask for your indulgence that I will have that sent down to you separately, because it obviously didn't make the deadline for the 19th hearing. And that's where we are. If there's any other questions, I'm certainly going to answer them for you if I can.
Thank you. Ms. Henley, have you seen these documents?
I have not.
Would you mind coming up to the podium?
We did talk about it. The reason we asked, thank you. I'm good with the revisions that he made.
Fantastic. Sal, do you mind if we take a second and just look at these? Thank you.
The only changes made is I added one other party, and on one of the sections there where it said they may assign this agreement at their sole discretion, I changed it to say only one time at their sole discretion. Those are the only two changes that I made on there. You need a copy?
Any board members have any questions or comments? Councilman Dingfelder.
Thank you. Thanks to the legal department for taking up their lunchtime to make these changes. Again, with all due respect to everybody involved, including Ms. Healy, I'm going to vote no, not as related to this particular contract, which I'm confident will work out, but as related to the whole project and how it came down. So.
What is the pleasure of the board?
Second, and I'll tell you why. Without this, the city would be in danger, in my opinion, of paying more for the development, because something would be built, and then you have to undo what you've already done. Thank you.
There is a motion on the floor made by Councilman Vieira, seconded by Councilman Miranda, on a resolution on item number 9. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
The motion carried with Dingfelder voting no.
All right. The long-awaited workshop, item number 10.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
before you go forward with the workshop, can we put on the services agreement? And I'd just like to give a brief explanation about
You are right.
that
Thank you
if we
very,
may.
very much.
You know, again, we pulled it out of the budget just to make it more transparent to all of you. It's a standalone thing. But, you know, a couple of things I wanted to make clear. The budget you approved did contemplate the city being the service provider under this service agreement. If it gives you any comfort, I understand we're gonna go forward now to discuss the question of whether the agency wants to continue to use the city as its service provider. The service agreement has a 30-day notice of cancellation period. So our suggestion is whatever you may ultimately decide after you have your discussion, in order to keep things moving forward, you know, for the near future, we recommend that you approve the services agreement, understanding that if you do decide to ultimately no longer use the city as your service provider, you can change it on 30 days cancellation. But I think part of the discussion will help make clear that it would not be a quick change that could happen overnight should you decide to go the private sector route. So we are requesting that for now you go ahead and approve the services agreement with the understanding again that it can be canceled. And one thing, as I was rereading it again, one of the questions that came up earlier had to do with RFPs. And if you look at Article 1, Section 6 of this agreement, and I apologize I didn't catch this sooner, it reads, for agreements related to projects that are or are likely to be funded in majority by TIF revenues, the Department of Urban Development will circulate the draft scope of services to all CRA board members for their input at the time that the draft scope is provided to CRA advisory committee members for comment. So I think that may address some of the concerns that were discussed earlier. So again, I'm not advocating which direction you want to go on the larger question of private versus public, but we do think that for now, in order to keep the engine moving and to keep the budget that you just approved able to be implemented, you approve this today. That's my comments. And John wanted to clarify something as well.
Before we get into that, on item number 9, did the substitute resolution need to be included in that?
Motion, yes, it should have been.
Okay, whoever made the motion, would you like to amend that?
I would like to amend the motion.
Second, amend.
Okay, thank you. Then, Ms. Selman, what you're saying, should we go ahead and go to number 3 first and then come back, or?
It was part of number 5.
Okay, I apologize again. We need to vote upon the substitute on, the amendment to include the substitute resolution on item number 9. All in favor?
Okay, so you're,
And the agreement.
I thought you did that already. Go ahead.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Thank you.
The motion carried with Dingfelder voting no.
Thank you. I just caught that. Thank you very much, council.
I
Chief.
just want to, in support of the conversation we just had with Ms. Ellman, is bring up that while it's true, and you have a 30-day, but there's also an opportunity to amend. And we talked about the collegial growth that we're going to see and the opportunities we see with the administration working with the CRA board going forward. So I think there's 3 opportunities. Approve as is. Obviously, you have a 30-day out option if you wanted to do something else. But there's also an amendment in there as well, not just the 2 bookends of that option. So just want to make sure that we talked about all 3 options as we move forward. And that's it, pending questions.
Yes, Councilman Carlson.
When we put this item on the agenda, I think item number 5 or 10, a couple of months ago, I suggested just extending for 30 days. I don't know if that's a possibility. But hopefully we're going to discuss the contract at the end of this other discussion because I think it informs it. I think that the 2 areas that I have the most concern about are, number 1, the services under Article 1. I've said a lot that we need to focus on economic development, not just real estate development, and part of a CRA is real estate. But if you look at those items 1 through 15 or whatever it is, they're almost all 18. They're almost all about real estate development, and so no wonder the reports that come back to us are all about real estate development because that's what we've said that we want to do. And I think we need strategic planning as this board to give input and direction to the CRA committee so that they can create their own strategic action items. So whether it's an amendment or whatever, I hope that we can completely rewrite that section. It probably should describe services, but maybe it should say as an addendum with the intent to implement the strategic plan of the CRA board. And then the other thing is the biggest, I'll just go ahead and say my biggest issue with everything, I don't want to undo the whole infrastructure that's here, and we wear 2 hats, so I certainly don't want to take 1.7 or 1.3 million away from the city because we also wear that hat. But we went through a long discussion with the prior attorney about jurisdiction or management of the CRAs, and I believe strongly that the CRA should have its own employee as the executive director. And right now, the city is in the process of trying to hire a new person for economic development. But I think somewhere in this document, first of all, we should have some influence over who we work with and how, and some guidelines for performance. And not that I've heard complaints. It's just that if we're responsible, we need to also have that we need to have the ability to deal with that. Just like any service agreement, if you have a service agreement with a copy machine, it breaks down, you expect to have a conversation about fixing it. But on the executive, instead of paying for half of an executive, I wish, which we share, and as a city employee, I wish under law we're allowed to hire our own employees. I'd like to hire our own CEO or executive director, and then the contract with the city would then report to that executive director. The executive director would report to us. That way, the lines of communication are clear, and we have our own dedicated person.
And just for clarity, would that executive director concept oversee the managers that were hired to fulfill the contract?
Yeah, that would. The problem as I see it right now is that we all don't have full information, and then we're all caucusing with staff, which takes a lot of time. If we ask lots of questions, it looks like it's a power struggle with the mayor or with the administration. If it was clear that we had a person, just like we do with the city council attorney, if we have our own person who reports to us, we can easily coordinate it with them, and then they would be the point person to coordinate with the city staff. So we don't have to take up as much city staff time. That way they can brief us.
And those are great comments. One thing that I know in the state of flux that we're going out to hire, obviously, someone to replace the economic development administrator, which is going to have a lot of functions underneath. A lot of them obviously tied to this. And, in that journey, we want to look to make sure we cover everything. So I guess part of my feedback would be, I heard a lot of process opportunity today, from our side, the management side, the exchange, how the budget's itemized. Mr. O'Hara and I have had sidebars about what we can see to do to improve some of that information flow. Is it a reasonable step to take a few meeting journeys to see how much we elevate that, and then still keep that consideration in mind as we vet through the growth of this lane under the city administration?
Yeah,
Just putting it out there.
One option which we had kind of discussed preliminarily in our earlier discussions is we could take this whole $1.7 million and hire our own staff and or outsource it to somebody else other than the city. But since we wear two hats, we shouldn't do that because that takes $1.5 million away from the city.
Sure.
But to hire a person would be probably somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000, and so. With that, to have a dedicated person, I think the issues in the CRAs are different than the rest of the city. If we, the conflict in the last few years was development of downtown versus everywhere else, or working on real estate development versus everything else. And I assume the mayor's going to hire a fantastic person. I think all the hires so far have been great. But no matter how great that person is, there's a whole city that we need to focus on that's outside the CRAs, and we need to just really narrowly focus on the CRA. We need somebody who takes the direction that we've got to come up with and work with staff and the outside resources. You know, one of the directives of the legislation and other things about CRAs is that they have to focus on affordable housing. I think only, as we asked them last time, only a couple of them do. Mm-hmm. And so they're going to have to, this person is going to have to coordinate with Ms. McCleary in housing. And so there's all these opportunities, which really I think is a full-time person. Maybe it's more than one staff, but instead of trying to take a big chunk of money away from the city, if we just took $100,000 or $200,000 or figured out if they can, maybe we pay the 1.7 and then figure out if we can get $150,000 from another source, but hire two people, and ideally they'll be collegial and work together, but they have two different purposes.
Understood.
Councilman Goose.
The way I see it, at the end of the day, and me being a person who has actually been a city employee, you still have a boss. I hear what Mr. Carlson is saying. I'm never for taking the CRA to an outside management company. I think that'll be bad. I think we'll lose money in the end. People will be trying to suck money out of us. So I'm not in agreement with that. But I am in favor of having our own person, just like we have our own city council attorney, to make sure we're getting validated information to be able to tell us what's good, what's bad, and to work with the administration. But yet we have our own person that we can communicate with and take our directives. Because I believe it's right. If you have an economic development person for the city, that person has a lot of responsibility. They're working all over the city versus just concentrating on a CRA. And that way, if you do have our own economic development person for our CRA, there's accountability, more accountability. Performance evaluations of the managers. Performance evaluations of that person that we choose to hire to make sure that the vision is carried out across the board. I don't think there's anything in the service agreement here that talks about any performance evaluations at all. And I think that's not a good sign. Everyone has to be accountable. I'm accountable to the voters. I mean, and I just think that we need to look at implementing some policies within the service agreement that talks about that. I'm for hiring an outside person that will be over our managers and be able to coordinate with city staff and have performance evaluations. I'm agree with that.
Councilman Miranda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a different view. Maybe I'm different. I have never ever, that I can recall, even attended a CRA meeting other than in this chamber. I don't believe that's fine. I don't believe you should do that. That's me personally. I may be wrong. But when you go sitting as a CRA member of the city and you go to a CRA meeting, whether you say one word or not, that may or may not change the balance of whoever's going to vote in whichever way they're going to vote because an elected official is there. I stay away from that. I never have been, and you can find me wrong. I don't ever recall ever going to one of them, and I do it with a reason, with an intent. I stay away because at the end of the day, I do the same thing with developers. I don't go see developers in their office, see what plans they got. I stay away because they're gonna appear before me. And, but the CRA is very special. It's to help the neighborhoods as best. Saying that, I would never vote for another CRA to be formed, because last year alone, it was ahead of $25 million for the budget. And what happens is this: when we talk about what happened in the past and why is something going to one place, let me put it back so everyone can understand. If the solid waste department is going to do a cleanup, do they do one house here and one house there, one house here, one house there, or do they do one in neighborhood at one time? So people can see the difference, see a change. When you're going to build the subdivision and you got 500 acres, you put one on 500 acres over there and the other one at every point, you don't see nobody? No, you put them there. People will see change. When you go develop a neighborhood, do you build one house in one block? Or you build 10 of them? The problem is today, most of us don't even know who your neighbors are because of the way of life. The inventions that are great for society, but people can't communicate anymore. When you look in the morning, who's riding a bus, you see all the kids texting each other and right next to each other. We live in a great world. However, I just feel that once you start taking parts of what's been working, and it has worked, that I know of, this CRA in Tampa has never had any great problems from any other government, including the state and federal level. However, look at other areas in the state, and there is a difference. Not all of them, but some had some problems. I just feel that whoever the city hires, we still have the right to say, you know what, it ain't working. Find another one, he or she. When you start taking apart one little screw out of an engine, that engine is not going to travel very far. When you have an individual that's on this, hired by the CRA board, and the managers hired, in essence, by the city, and it's not 1.7 million coming out of the city budget. It's 1.7 million coming to the CRA budget that would affect somebody else's life. The city may not be funding all of it, but there's a lot of it that's done that you don't even see that's done for free. And when we start messing around with that, it ain't gonna be 1.7. It may be 2.7 that you're gonna take out of CRA. And what are you gonna do then? The 1.7 is about a 50-50 match. I may be 3.4 mathematically. So what I'm saying is, beware what you do for change. If that change may come back to say, you know what, I erred. And there's nothing wrong with making an error as long as you admit it. I was taught one thing in baseball: you can make an error, you can't make a mistake. There's a difference. And I'm not going that route. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilman Maniscalco.
If the matter is just about hiring our own executive director, if that's what we call it, that person would be, I would consider them, fair and impartial, not beholden to anyone else outside of the information that that person would give the CRA. Up until now, we've had the economic development director that's, paid 50-50, but that person is very close to the mayor. I remember as I was chairman for the last 2 years, people would tell me, you don't realize the power that you have. You have your own attorney, you have your own staff, you don't have to answer to the other side. And we didn't abuse that power as a CRA board. But moving forward, if this is, well, we're talking about one position, we're not talking about changing the entire staff, but someone that oversees the managers, I think it would be a more efficient process because we go to one person that gives us the information, and that's it, that's already done the communicating, just like the chief of staff. I mean, you oversee all the other departments, but should I have a question, I can relay it to you, and then, you go from there. But I don't, I really don't see the issue if it's just this one position. We're not reorganizing everything. We're just centralizing it where it's like an umbrella. You have one person that is the liaison, and that's it.
Councilman Vieira.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On what Councilman Carlson talked about with having potentially an employee dedicated solely, yes, I'm certainly open to that idea. I think that's obviously things would have to be fleshed out, more specifics, et cetera, but I don't think that's an unreasonable request. given some of the concerns that have arisen. I think that it can alleviate some of the concerns of CRA members, et cetera, and bring more openness and positivity into the CRAs. However, when you take a look at the issue of nonprofits or other organization helping manage CRAs, I know there's been discussions potentially of the East Tampa CRA in particular going under whatever you want to call it, nonprofit, privatization, management, whatever you want to call it. To me, I think that's ultimately probably a solution in search of a problem, I'd have to say respectfully. You take a look at our CRAs right now, and in terms of the challenges that we have, challenges in terms of community progress on the CRAs, et cetera, these are type of things that can be addressed with the tools and the system that we presently have. A radical, in my opinion, radical departure from what we have right now is something that is not warranted. We have not exhausted all the remedies that we have in our hands. This employee may be one of those remedies, and so that's certainly something that I'm open at looking at. But we have very good, I believe, CRAs here in the city of Tampa. A lot of the stuff that you hear coming out of Tallahassee is not or should not be directed here at the city of Tampa. And I think by taking radical departures, we send the wrong message to Tallahassee and to those folks who do not respect local rule, which is that we are deviating from a system that works and that can be improved, but within the confines of the system as we know it. I think that maybe hiring an additional employee solely dedicated to the CRA works within that system. Other measures I don't think are warranted at this time, in my opinion.
Well said, Councilman Vieira. I'm getting to Councilman Dingfelder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. A couple of things. It's funny, Bill, as I was going through this last night, I wrote myself a note and I said, dedicated CRA manager, question mark. I hadn't taken it to the level that you suggested, although I'm hearing some good things about it, and I think we would, if we did that, and I'm not opposed to it, I think it's kind of a neat idea, but if we did it, I think we'd have to get agreement from the city as our contractor, to modify the service agreement slightly to be abundantly clear that if that person is going to be in that position answering directly to us, there's a chain of command concern I have, because those 6 or 8 folks out there right now answer to you and the mayor. But if we all of a sudden inject this new person who answers to us, we're going to have to figure that out perhaps in writing, that they would answer to that person that we put in there. Otherwise, that person flounders around by themselves without having anybody working for them. You know what you see where I'm going on that, John?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just run through a couple of things. Mr. Vieira, in regard to the bigger item that's on item 3 and item 10, and I brought that up probably at the first CRA meeting. I had a chat with a senior manager in the city recently who has done great things in that person's department. And that senior manager said, sometimes in these bureaucracies, you just have to shake things up a little bit to get some positive movement. And Mr. Bennett might be familiar with the person I'm talking about, but the bottom line is at the end of the day, that's why I made the motion. That's why I put this on the agenda, is to remind ourselves, to remind the city, to remind the community, as Bill said, that the buck stops here. If something screws up in the CRA, okay, that gentleman typing against the wall over there is going to be asking us about it. And therefore, we do need to take more responsibility. And that's what we're doing. So I think it's a good discussion. I'm not advocating today. I think that this is a new administration. I like the tone that we've been hearing in all sorts of directions from this administration. I think that we can modify and tweak and refine, and that's where we're at today. But I liked your suggestion, Bill. I think a dedicated CRA manager, kind of similar to Martin Shelby, who answers to us, is a good idea. Just some other little issues. I mentioned earlier, we don't have any budget for ourselves in terms of managing the CRA or getting further educated on good practices. What if we wanted to bring in an expert to talk to us about these things? We have nothing. So I think that down the road, we should look at a budget amendment to address, something nominal like $50,000 as an administrative budget for those types of issues. Audits. Sal or anybody who's been around a long time on this, I don't recall seeing any audits in terms of the individual CRAs or the CRA as a whole. Does the city audit staff audit this group, and then the next question to us is, should we have any kind of outside audit? A little more independent audit. But yes, sir.
Sal, to the legal department. There is a financial audit that's done every year for the city. You are included as a separate item, but it's an independent audit that's included with the actual audit document, but it is separate.
That's the financial audit.
That's the financial audit. But as far as
the performance audit?
Performance audit, they have not done that. I think if you wanted to do that, you could have that done by the internal staff. I think there might be a cost to that unless you get some agreement from the administration.
Well, I always find those performance audits very valuable, department by department, because they always do find, usually they don't find anything huge, but sometimes they find some little things and they work with the department to fix those. And I think that would be healthy for us to figure out how to do that. And the final comment I have, and Bill, this relates a little bit to where you were headed. The individual districts come up with their own strategic plan, but this body, talking about things like affordable housing and economic development and those big picture things, this body we need to go into a retreat with a facilitator and come up with our own strategic plan. What is the strategic plan for the CRA of Tampa as a whole? And that's my humble opinion. But obviously, if we have somebody on board, they can help facilitate that process.
Councilman Carlson. I'm sorry, Councilman Dickfelder, were you finished?
I think I was. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Carlson.
And several short comments. What Councilman Miranda said about influence or intervention in the individual CRAs came up in that grand jury report that I sent you all too. So it can't look like we're trying to use it as little fiefdoms at our districts or anything like that. So we do need to be mindful of that. That's again why if we have a full-time person that we could work on that. Just a couple ideas about having a full-time CRA executive director, I would call it, because we want a pretty senior level person, I think. Number one, you kind of alluded to this, Councilman Dingfelder. It's a two-way street. So if the mayor and chief of staff and the staff of the CRAs don't like the person, they're going to give us feedback and say, well, we're going to pull out of the contract if you don't change something, right? So there is a two-way street there. The other thing, did you hear that part, Mr. Bennett?
Yes, I
just
did.
said there's a two-way street. The other thing is that maybe if we get down to doing this, we could propose formally or informally that chief of staff and the mayor would have at least a courtesy interview with the person to make sure the person's compatible, because there's not a direct reporting structure, but the person has to be able to get along. It's like our legislative aides and Marty. Marty has to be able to get along with the city attorney. Our legislative aides have to be able to get along with the other staff. And to that point, 3 of us were on the Charter Review Commission, and our attorney was so 4 of us were on the Charter Review Commission. And one of the things we did, maybe Ms. Zellman can tell me exactly what we did, but one of the things we did is we expanded the ability of City Council to hire its own staff. Part of the discussion was that we said, well, in the future, as the city grows, maybe we'll need more than just the staff we have now. And I wonder so the options are, we as a CRA, the prior attorney told us that we could just hire our own staff person, but we don't have HR and all of that. So we could also, second option, we could do a deal like we do with Marty, where I think he's an independent contractor, but we hire him and he acts like a staff person. But a third option might be that there's a separate contract between CRA and City Council, where the CRA pays the City Council fund for staff, and then the person is an employee just like our legislative aides, but is funded through the City Council staff. So just another another thought. And then when we talk about strategic plan and other things, maybe we can make motions regarding all of that. But should we make a motion about hiring it? I'd like to make a motion that we investigate hiring an executive director that reports directly to us, and I don't know who we would ask to do that, but.
And what the structure is, because you've
So
identified a
what
couple of different structures.
Maybe if I could wrap something together, I would move that we approve the agreement between the city council, between the city and the CRA, but that we ask city staff to work with us to modify to amend items number 1 through 18, and come back to us maybe at our next meeting to offer an amendment to that based on input with each of us, so that we can rework the guidelines. And then number 2, that staff work with us to come up with a proposal for hiring a dedicated executive director for the CRA, and make that proposal back to us, maybe with options again at our next meeting.
Second.
Before we go into a vote, I would like to just ask for commentary both from Chief and from Sal on this.
Well, first of all, I appreciate the ability to consider the motion to get through this and then work with staff. I think that's a very solid iterative approach to something that has this much value to the community. I think there are options within the options. I think, what I was trying to do is distill all the conversation down to one word, as I always do, and it all comes back to what problem are we trying to solve, and that's accountability. And we try and do that through the 3 E's that I always talk about: efficiency, effectiveness, and equity. We want to make sure each CRA gets what their best needs and best outcomes. We want to make sure we do it as efficiently as possible, which has been said over and over again, to get the best value for our dollar. We also know there's a lot of in-kind services, as Councilman Miranda mentioned, that go unline itemed until you see those line items in a different model. So there's the efficiency part. And ultimately, the effectiveness is to get the job done in that level of accountability we're talking about. I think this is a good move. I really do. I think there's an opportunity to keep the wheels of government moving for all the reasons we know based on the budget you approved. This is no small system, this CRA model. It's a big city. It's a big CRA. We have obviously all the different CRAs. I know we have a dedicated managerial staff that wants to prove their level of accountability back to the CRA board working with you. I see a lot of opportunity for growth and, to keep using that word, some collegial level of integration. So I'm fully understanding what you're trying to do about giving us room to work together and come back within a month if that's the board's wish.
Anything you'd like to add, Sal?
I think we're good.
There's a motion made by Councilman Carlson, seconded by Councilman Dingfelder. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
The motion carried with Miranda voting no.
I'll move the service agreement if we didn't move it directly in that last motion. Is that included? Yeah. All right. What else, Mr. Chairman?
What else do we have?
We have work to do. That's what we have.
Yeah.
Right, Councilman Goods?
Well, I told people when they come to me about John Bennett, I said, well, John has his ways, but what I can say, he tries to find solutions to the problems. There's a sidebar, I know he came up to me and told me about one of our parks that I have down in the south end of town, and told me that the memorandum that I received from the community, he assembled all of the staff in reference to those issues, and he has questions on why these things have not been done over the years. Why standing water and some type of bridge hasn't been built over the water if we have standing water? So I'm applauding, because you're doing things that's got to be done. People want accountability for the services, and if we're in charge of a city, people are paying taxes, and those who don't pay taxes, they live here. They deserve to still have a place to be enjoyed. So I applaud your efforts, and just glad we're working together again and try to get some things moving.
Thank you. We had if I could just add on to that, we had a saying when we started really reducing crime heavily is, patrol like you live there. And that's the same attitude that we like to bring to the field every day. I know these CRA managers, I know the city staff wants to work like they live where they work and treat the facilities and all the infrastructure and the safety the same way as if they live in that neighborhood. But I think sometimes we have to liberate their ability to get things done, and that's what we're doing now, is removing barriers under this administration.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Carlson.
Also would like to make a motion that we ask the staff or someone to give us a recommendation on how we can go through some kind of strategic planning process to make sure that we're giving guidance to the CRAs to follow the law and the boundaries or directives that we think. Otherwise, what happens is they keep coming up to us, and we have long discussions. The way we can get rid of the long discussion is having a strategic plan. So I would like to move that staff come back to us with a recommendation on creating a strategic plan for this board.
So, third.
So I'm not opposed to that at all.
We have a motion made by Councilman Carlson, seconded by Councilman Maniscalco. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
The motion carried unanimously, and just to clarify, is that for a report next month, or is there a date next month? Thank you.
Anyone else? I would first like to say this, that having been a member of a group of people that had 2 CRAs, first under the leadership of Mr. Vince Pardo, the ambassador, the mayor of Ybor City, then with Miss Courtney Orr, I learned a lot about CRAs. I've seen the ways they're structured, listening to the citizens of those CRAs first, then having those ideas go to committee, and then approval by the boards. After they got the approval by the boards, it then came to this board for final approval, where the buck stopped. And I am glad that I had those 8 years to see how CRAs work and the great things that can be done, especially in Ybor City. Not only business, entertainment, residential, but the great things that CRAs can do. And I'm glad I have those 8 years of service. I still go back to CRA board meetings, only to hear public discussion. Once a motion is made, and Ms. Courtney Orr will attest to this, I stand up and say, I'm out of here, I will talk to you later. CRAs fill the niches that need to be done. And I'm thankful that I had that experience on a CRA board to see how things work. Any information? Let's start with Councilman Dingfelder. Informational reports? New business?
New business. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I alluded to earlier, I received an email from the Cuban Club and its chairman, Patrick Montega. Patrick's been working really hard with his team to do millions of dollars of improvements to the Cuban Club, and I don't need to tell you guys about the great history of that building. But he feels a little constrained in terms of the current facade program. Apparently, it even went worse for him because now apparently our rule 3.3.3 says that you can only come back for $50,000 once every 24 months. I wrote back to Patrick and I said, what kind of money do you need for your facade program? And he said he hasn't priced it out exactly, but it's probably in the neighborhood of $400,000. So at that basis, it would take him 16 years of $50,000 every other year, to hit that level. So what I'd like to do is ask staff to come back to us next month and explore the possibility that maybe certain unique nonprofit structures, nonprofit organizations that own buildings that are on the historic registry, like the Cuban Club or the Italian Club or whatever, that they might qualify for more than the 50,000 in terms of facade grants, maybe 100,000, maybe 150,000. I'm not sure exactly what Ybor can afford, but, and also that we would reduce that back to every 12 months, so that those specific buildings under that type of ownership wouldn't have to wait 24 months. So that's my motion.
We have a motion duly made by Councilman Dingfelder, seconded by Councilman Vieira. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
And apparently, Mr. Bennett, you need to work with legal on that, because it looks like it's part of our policy. So if we went that direction, we need to amend our policy.
Understood.
Thank you. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The motion carried unanimously.
Thank you. Councilman Goods.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one item. For years, we have been called the retention pond capital of East Tampa. They're all over the place. There is one in particular that the community's been talking about for a long time. I know State Representative Diana Hart, we had a little conversation the other night in reference to one particular area. And I'm looking to get information in reference to this particular area. I'm going to put a motion on the floor. It has about 9 different points in the motion. I won't read them all, but I will give the motion as to reference to, we have an environmental pond on 26th Avenue between 22nd and 26th Street. I'd like staff to come back with recommendations on the 9 different points I have on the motion I'm going to make and submit to the clerk. And I need them as detailed as possible. If I can get a second, I'd be grateful.
Motion made by Councilman Good, seconded by Councilman Miranda. Before we take a vote, is there any discussion? All right, are you just asking for this one retention pond or all the retention ponds that made?
This one particular.
Okay. Does FDOT need to?
Actually, so not, some say it's a retention, some say it's an environmental pond, so that's why I want staff to find out what it is and be able to come back with the 9 points I have. And if they need to contact FDOT or whoever, fine. But
That is my question, because some of the retention ponds do belong to FDOT, and I'm not sure about this one.
So that's why I listed everything on there, so they can contact whoever they need to contact and bring that information back to us.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Motion carried unanimously.
Anything else, Councilman Good?
That's it, sir, thank you.
Councilman Maniscalco?
No. Nothing, sir.
No, sir. No, thank you. Need a motion to file.
Second.
Got a motion by Councilman Miranda, seconded by Councilman Maniscalco to receive and file. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, we are adjourned.
501.
5:00.